So big welcome to everyone to this first class in EDU121 Critical Thinking for Effective Learning. Let's begin with a Bible reading and prayer. I think as a Christian organisation, it's valuable to understand that God is involved in every area of our life. A Bible reading for 1 Corinthians 3 says, "Do not deceive yourselves. If anyone thinks they are wise, by the standards of this age, you should become foolish or humble, so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world can be foolishness in God's sight. As it's written, he catches the wise in their craftiness or pride. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise can be futile. So then no boasting, particularly about human leaders or human ideas and human leaders of ideas." And a prayer from Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274. "Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom, and pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect, dissipating the darkness which covers me, that of sin and ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, and lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. Guide the beginning of my work and direct its progress, bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you, the Father, forever and ever." So you found the link for today on Moodle, and so there'll be resources each week. Keep me informed about the number of resources. So if you want more resources, we can do it. If you want less resources, we can go that way as well. And so there has to be a balance between the number of resources, not to overload or underload you there, but you'll find information there. There's 3 time slots that we meet. So Monday from 3 till 5. So if you can't make any of the other 2, Monday for CEM, ACTS and STATS, but we can move students around if you have difficulties, and there might be some extra students from there today as well. And then Wednesday, which is the class we're in, and then tomorrow from 8:30 to 9:30, 10:30, so it should be 10:30. So each class is 2 hours long. So we'll have about 50 to 55 minutes of class, 5-minute break, and then the second class after that. So I want to do a bit of an introduction here at the beginning, and then I want to go on and look at some notes. So a brief introduction to where we're at and what we're covering here. And so first of all, on each week on Moodle, I encourage you to have a look at the Moodle resources for that week, and then to work through with those. And so here you'll find this, the Moodle resources for that period of time. So going up to the top of the page. So you've got an introduction here where I introduce a little bit about myself, and I encourage you, as a number of students have done, to go to the introduce the students section of Moodle, and also introduce yourself. And if you can put a picture up there as well, that'll be very helpful, and we'll get to know one another. One of the great joys, I think, of study is meeting other people that you'll have relationships for many years to come. So I encourage you to chat with one another whenever you can, and that we should set up opportunities whereby you can interact with one another. That'll be really valuable. And if you live near other students, then it'd be good to interact there as well. A little bit about myself. I, after graduating from university, had opportunity to teach in secular schools. So I was very excited about teaching mathematics and science. Love science, love biology, dissections, cut a frog heart open and all of those things. And then I went on to do more of the humanities. And then from my interest in Christian work, became a youth leader and then a church pastor, and then did a Bachelor of Ministry and Masters, which included education and ministry, and then did a PhD on the megachurches, and also taught biblical studies. So if you want to find out a bit more about my writing on the megachurches, if you type in Sam Hay megachurches, you could find out a bit more about that. So I'm passionately interested in education and teaching. I remember when I was young, I got the kids from next door to sit down at the piano and taught them piano. I got kids from down the road and we did drama. I got them to put on a play, and all the way through, I still try and get kids on the piano or to do little dramatic plays and things like that. So very, very interested in all aspects of teaching. So there's a student personal introductions forum, and so I encourage you that you can go there, and you'll see other students have introduced themselves, and it's a great opportunity to meet the different students, and you can see there's a bit about each one, and you can, I think, email different students, and you could arrange a catch up, get to know other students as well. So I encourage you to go to that page. You've got 3 assignments in this class, and so one of the assignments, before we even start with the assignments, we could mention build a resource folio and folder. So open a folder on your computer, save resources each week, and you can put them in separate little folders within that folder, and so I encourage you to do that. Your first major assignment, assessment task 1, is the forum posts. And so for the forum posts, you're asked to do 1 post of 100 words each week for 10 weeks. And if you put it on 1 Word document, then at the end of 10 weeks, you submit that Word document to turn it in, and that makes sure that you've not plagiarized your forum posts there. So it's easier if you have it on 1 Word document, and then you cut and paste from that Word document into the post that you do for each week. And I've sent an email out saying 200 or 300 words would be okay. And then if you added a reference or 2 or 3, then that would possibly increase the academic presentation and could possibly give you a higher grade. So you get a grade of pass, credit, distinction, high distinction. We don't want you to put too much time into this, but if you've got a system whereby you could do this fairly quickly, we want you to think about how you are interacting with the resource. What does it mean to you? We want you to be authentic and real about what it means to you. But if you do that, you could end up waffling on and on 400 or 500 words. I'm okay if you do that on a diary entry that you save, and then cut and paste and shorten it down to 100 or 200 or 300 words that you post. So I think sometimes it's good to have a diary entry where you reflect on what does this mean to me, and then you might have to shorten that, and then you might make that personal reflection about 1/3 of your post, because it's good also in your post to interact with scholars and to say, I think that this speaks to me subjectively, I feel that this is the most wonderful thing ever. And then it's good to say scholars have said, and then give the names of some scholars, and that makes it more academic, and that'll develop that further. Any questions about your forum posts that you do each week?
I tried to post mine for this week, and it said I couldn't because I need to get the exact wording up. There's some issue with it.
Yeah, there's probably a dozen or more students have sent in that observation, and we've sent that on to the administration. But I encourage you to, if you have difficulties, to send it on to the administration, and then you can either email a copy to me if you still can't get it up. So there are ways that we can do that. And then if you keep a track of the post you've done, the dates you do the post, all of that, that'll mean that you'll qualify fully for that along the way. And if you have any questions along the way, then get in touch for that. Any other questions about the forum posts?
Sorry, just another one. I also couldn't find your email on the page, so I was wondering if you could send that through sometime during the lecture.
Yes, excellent. So at the break, I'll make a note of the Sam Hay email. I'll do that. And you may also find my personal email somewhere as well. So if you have any difficulty with the college email, then my personal email could get through as well. So that's the personal one, but I'll look up the Alpha Crucis one as well. And so we saw it briefly. It came up.
I think if you go back to overview and then scroll down, overview, it's on the
overview, yes.
Scroll down.
And then scroll down, and it's just, I think the improve your profile is, there it is, sam.hey, so it's sam.hey, and then like most of these emails, it's at acd.edu.au. So that's assignment 1 is the Moodle posts. And then assignment 2, you'll be asked to reflect on your own worldview. So assignment 2, we want you to reflect on how you view the world in order to better understand yourself. And because this is about critical thinking and thinking, we want you to understand how you understand thinking. So assignment 2, minor essay, 1,500 words, 24th of April, I think, 30%. I put a video up for assignment 1 that you can watch, and then at the end of 10 weeks, you submit that to turn it in. I'll put a video up on assignment 2 that you can watch, which is about the way you view the world. And over the next few weeks, next week we'll look at Greek, Plato, Aristotle views of the world. The following week, Christian, Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus, Apostle Paul views of the world. And then we'll go on to Augustine, Martin Luther, and their view of the world. And then when we come up to the present time, your view of the world could be called a modern Christian view of the world, if you're a Christian and if you live in the modern world. And it has certain peculiarities about it. So we want you to understand your view of the world. And then in assignment 3, if you're teaching Aboriginal people who have a different view of the world, or Torres Strait Island people, or Papua New Guinea people, people with a different background, or Muslim people, or Buddhist people, or atheist people, we want you to think about 2 examples in assignment 3 of other people groups, and we want you to write about that in assignment 3, and I'll put up a little video about that as well. Are there any questions about assignments 2 and 3? Yep, so that's all good. There's important information. You'll see that there is a subject outline. This is a subject outline from a year or 2 back, and we try and keep the subjects consistent. But if you go to this subject outline, the order of things may be slightly different. Certainly the details like the overview is going to be the same. It's worth keeping a copy of this handy even when you do your assignments, so that you can look at what's being required in the subject. And then further down, you'll see that the learning outcomes we seek to achieve, we want you to know what are the different ways we know. And I find quite interesting that we often talk about knowing as remembering and communicating information, but knowing can also be emotions and feeling. And so when you hear a piece of music, it's not just Mozart wrote this on such and such a date. It makes you feel certain things in certain ways. So we can think about another way of knowing is emotional and experiential. And then there's lots of different ways of knowing when people communicate information. We'll look at Bloom's taxonomy briefly, which you do in other subjects. We'll look at understanding and communicating and putting into practice. Another one of the objectives there is to understand the impact of various interpretations of truth on teaching practice. And so we'll look at that. We'll also look at the fields of knowledge. And so we've got maths and science and the humanities. We'll look at KLAs, key learning outcomes. And then we're going to look more at other ways people see the world. A couple of years ago, my wife and I had a chance to visit the Amish people in Philadelphia, and we stayed there for a day or so. And they view the world a little bit differently, very anti-technology. And so they do allow the possibility of a phone in the house, but that would be dangerous if it was in the house itself. So if you've got a woodshed down the back that's locked, you could keep your mobile phone down in the woodshed and keep it locked to make sure no one use that technology to, destroy the world or destroy the home. Interestingly, in the Amish community, they have push bikes, but they don't have pedals on them, because that could be the end of the world. People would just ride too far if they had pedals on the push bikes. So they just have push along push bikes. And so you can go past an Amish push bike shop and it's all push along ones, so that you can go down to the corner store, but not too far to break up the family and destroy the community. And so it's a different view of the world, isn't it? And then you can visit Aboriginal communities here in Australia, or native communities, North American Indian communities. They view the world differently. And so that's something we'll look at later in this course. So we are looking at worldview. What's a Christian worldview? And next week we'll look at a little bit at Plato, Aristotle, Greek worldview, and the following week a look at the Old Testament, New Testament Christian worldview. But we'll reflect on what's your worldview. Interestingly, we could reflect on different denominational backgrounds, and I find that quite fascinating. I guess many of us at Alpha Crucis might come from a more Pentecostal background. And so I have a view of the Pentecostal world is that the more spiritual you are, the more you move, and the higher you lift your arms and the higher you leap off the ground. Now, my parents came from an Anglican church, and a reasonably high Anglican church. And their view of the world is the more spiritual you are, the less you move your arms, and the more you keep still and the less you move. Now, correct me if I'm wrong about these different worldviews, but I think denominational worldviews can be quite fascinating. And also more Pentecostal Methodist worldviews, the world is bad and we've got to change it, so pray as hard as you can. And yet my understanding of the Reformed, and my wife taught in a Reformed school, and I was on the board of a Reformed school, their view of the world is God controls everything and everything works out for good. And so you don't have to get so worked up as Pentecostals and Methodists do. So there's just two sides, and maybe they're two sides of the one coin, and there's truth in both of them. But when we come to Christian worldview, it'd be interesting to think about what is your Christian worldview, and how do you know your Christian worldview is the right one? And then if you've got people in your class, half of whom are from the Reformed view and half are from a Pentecostal Methodist view, how do you work with parents and children from these different categories? So we'll think about that and the way you respond. And if you've got the answers, send it through to me, because I'll be interested as well. Leadership, we'll be thinking about leadership and how do we know which leadership approaches are the best leadership approaches. And school often involves leadership, and as teachers, you'll have an opportunity to contribute to leadership. So what is Christian leadership? Integrity and justice connects with leadership. What's it mean to have integrity and justice, to be able to communicate well, and to be able to develop personal and social skills? These are other ways of knowing. And then critical and creative thinking as well. So all of this information you'll find on the subject outline. I encourage you to download a copy of that, read through it and get to know it. But the content and sequencing that you have there could be different to slightly. And so I've put up a lecture schedule that will be slightly different. And so they leave the Greeks until week 3. I've moved it up to week 2. So there's minor changes like that that I think will be beneficial for us. So next week we look at the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, which a year or two previously they left that following, because I want to get on then to Christian worldviews and various ways of knowing and see it in its context. One of the other interesting things about thinking is that, do we need language to think? For instance, if you got injured and you lost the language part of your brain, and I've actually met someone who lost the part of the language part of the brain, then how do you think without language? Anyone got any thoughts on that? How does a person think if they lose the language part of the brain? Georgia, you're smiling. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I guess potentially like there might be a visual aspect to thinking. We dream in sort of pictures, and potentially that could be a thing.
Yeah, and you could imagine that a person who's had that damage would still be able to feel and experience. A couple of weeks back, I attended a conference presentation from Belgium, in which they work with comatose people. And what they're doing now is they're getting comatose people to think of playing tennis or playing football or swimming, and they can actually see different parts of the brain light up when they think in different ways. And so then they've applied this to other comatose people who, and even to people that they thought were totally not alive at all. And they found they're able to think of swimming or tennis, and they can ask them questions. You know, if you wanted to continue to live, think of swimming. If you felt that life was over, think of tennis or something like that. And what they're finding is that sometimes 30 to 40% of cases that they thought weren't able to think, who are comatose, can actually think, but in different ways, because there's been damage there. But this raises interesting questions about language and thinking, but it also raises in teaching questions. If you've got some students who are good with language and know the meanings of words, they're able to do well. But if students are dyslexic or having trouble with language, then they're facing all sorts of difficulties along the way. So language and learning is something we look at in week 7. Week 8, we'll look at emotion and learning. Week 9, we look at good and evil and ethics and thinking. Week 10, we then look at the discrimination and equality. Week 11, we look at group thinking and then politics, and we do a review in year 12. So there's lots of very interesting topics about thinking that we'll be looking at. But what I find particularly important is that this all flows through to the way you're growing and developing as a person and as a Christian. If you can think better, then you can be way more effective in life and in your teaching. So certainly thinking is going to be very, very important. Can we go through now and get a few people to tell me a little bit about what do you think we mean by thinking? So perhaps if we start with Jackson, any thoughts on what do we mean by thinking? And can I get everyone, perhaps if you've got a computer there, to write down, what do we mean by thinking? If I was in a classroom, I'd get you to pair share and talk to the person next to you, because that would then mean that of the 12 or so students, then 50% would be talking and the other 50% very actively listening, and you could swap it over, but might be a little bit harder to do it. But Jackson, what do we mean by thinking?
It's funny because I'm trying to think of what I mean by thinking. how to put that into words. I think it's just gathering outside information and trying to interpret that inside your brain.
Mm. Yeah, so certainly part of it is gathering outside information. So it's responding to the world around you. Someone else want to add another important, rather different view? Elke, do you have any thoughts on what's rather different to responding to the world that's out there?
Reflecting on your own development. I feel like when we're talking about thinking, we're talking about being an effective learner and being able to teach effective learning. And so it's actually more about self-reflection.
And we're going to do more of this next week with Plato and Aristotle, because Plato initially said that, like Socrates before him. So Socrates had said, you've really got to think about your own life, and you got to think about where life's going. And so it's all about reflection. And then Plato agreed with him. But then we have Aristotle said no. As Jackson said, really, you've got to begin with looking at what's out there. And even when children are first learning their first words, are they inward reflecting, or are they looking at what's out there when they say mama, dada? And there's a combination of both taking place. I think Plato and Aristotle are both correct in some ways. But other thoughts on, Martha, any thoughts on what we're doing when we're thinking?
Yeah, I really liked the whole reflecting on your own inner life, but I think, just feelings and emotions have a lot to do with our thinking. They'll shape the way we think about things, and I guess they just, feelings and emotions. That's what I'm going with.
And you picture a classroom in which you're giving them great, exciting information, like I'm doing now, and then a third of the class could be deliberate thinking, trying to follow what you're saying. But 2/3 of the class, random thoughts could be coming into their mind, and they're thinking afternoon tea, the evening meal, did they leave the iron on or kettle on? So there's all these random thoughts coming into your mind. And then there are subconscious thoughts that you're not even so aware of. When I was 2 years old, I was mistreated or something like that. So there's all sorts of things that are going on in your mind. And we could look a bit more at neuroscience, and we could look a bit more at different ways of thinking. And in future weeks and years, we could explore that even further. So some models of understanding thinking and consciousness, the Hebrew understanding of the person is a whole person. And so mind and body are very much integrated. But the Greeks, they felt that you've got body, soul, and spirit, or body and soul. And so do the New Testament stick with the Hebrew understanding, or does the Apostle Paul work with body and soul and spirit because he's more interacting with Greek thinkers as well? All that could be discussed. And then Sigmund Freud found that from 1820 through to 1880, people were getting more scientific, and they were learning about Pavlov's dog, your ring a bell, and salivating, and environmental stimulus. And then people started to measure reaction things. And so psychology became very scientific. Psychology in 1820 or so included study of the Bible, formation, prayer, but all of that got left behind when in the 1880s, psychology, like other sciences, became very scientific and measuring things. And Sigmund Freud then into the early 1900s starts to say, hang on, you've left out all the subconscious. That is, it's not what you can observe, it's what's going on in the subconscious. And so Sigmund Freud then has the rights on the ego and the id, and he says there's 3 parts of the person. And so the ego is the you, and then you've got the id and you've got the super ego. Anyone able to tell me what the id and super ego are? Rachel, any thoughts?
I don't know. I haven't done a lot on exploring Freud's theory on it. But from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it has a lot to do with how you view yourself and how you view yourself in the world.
Yeah. And so if you parents encourage you to view yourself as doing well, then your superego keeps that memory and says that you need to do the right thing. Whereas if you had rougher parents who said just yell it out and thump them on the nose, then your lower tendencies down there in the subconscious, in the id, could say that. And then now, and a lot of scholars have said to think of the ego as the self is incorrect. The self is all of these: the ego, the id, the superego. And the ego is where you are actively responding and choosing what you do. So that's the decision-making center of your life, where you choose good things or not so good things, and you're influenced by there. So we've thought about one idea of the person, which is a Hebrew idea: you're a holistic whole. And then we've got the New Testament, which has Hebrew thought and possibly Greek thought. And the Greeks had the idea that you are the chariot rider, the ego, and then you've got a black horse, which is could go wild, but that's quite exciting in a chariot race. But you also have a nice white horse that is more compliant and does the right thing. So that's a Greek view of the world. And so the Greeks are trying to divide things up to understand it. So you've got the ego, and then buried in your subconscious is your parents' influence, ideas of God. God may have placed within you a conscience, and then other sources could give you the bad ways of responding as well. So ego is the executive functions, making decisions, giving you agency. The superego down in your subconscious is ideals and morals and where they come from, partly from your parents and partly they may be placed by God within. And then your unconscious down in the id are the more immediate drives of fight and flight, sex, aggression, food, all of those things that you might respond very quickly to, including fear and rapid response. So there is a short connection between what you see in the world and fight and flight. And so if something suddenly happens, then you may react quickly, and then it takes longer to connect to the cognitive, a robber has pulled his gun on me. What would be the best way to respond at this time? Maybe if I talk nicely to him. Well, it takes longer to think that through than run or hit him or something. So, and counselling has to deal with that. And as teachers, it's important to realise that at times students can respond with the fight or flight. And then if we can get them to calm down and then speak to them when they've thought things through, and if we can encourage them to think things through, then we'll do much better with that. Others in more recent times, like Bernard Bears, says that the mind is a bit more like a spotlight on a stage or theatre stage, and you choose as the agent as to what to focus on. And then on the sidelines, there are others wanting to come onto the stage and say they want their bit of time. And so if anger is over on the side, and I don't like little Johnny sitting next to me in the classroom, then it's a good idea to allow anger to come onto the stage and have its brief moment, but you don't want it there all the time forever. You want it just to say, can anyone think what's the danger if anger's on the sideline because Johnny annoys you, if you say, never think about it, put it to one side? Any thoughts, Sally, on what's the danger of telling people never think about it?
You could allow the feeling to build up and it will just bubble over in explosions.
Yeah, exactly. So counsellors and psychologists say it's better to give it its little bit of time, and then to say, having voiced its little bit of time, one needs to put it to one side. So that's another very interesting way of viewing the world. And then there is an audience out there that we're aware of in our identity. So these are studies of the brain and what we mean by thinking, and we can look further at those in times to come. So what are the objectives in our class? We want to understand thinking. We want to understand why it's important. We want to understand the ways knowledge comes to us, the way it's understood, processed and communicated. And then we want to understand, today we're going to focus quite a bit on assumptions. So what assumptions do we make when we're thinking, and what are sound assumptions or not so good assumptions? And in one of the videos that I have put up, we gave you some pictures in a slide that gave the different information about what we're doing. And then further down, we had some puzzles which wrestle with the concept of assumptions. And one of the ones that I put up there about an assumption was this picture. So anyone seen this yet? Train goes through a tunnel. It all goes dark, and there are 3 people in the carriage. And one of the people in the carriage is a very high up general, colonel, and it all goes dark. And then the 2 other people in the carriage are the young soldier you can see down the bottom, and then there's a lady in the carriage. So young soldier, colonel, and lady. All goes dark going through the tunnel, and you hear a kiss, and then you hear a slap, and then they come out the other side of the tunnel, and the colonel is wiping the side of his face and not happy. So Tegan, can you tell us what you think happened? Is you got to make assumptions maybe? Do we have enough information in terms of assumptions? What do you think happened, Tegan?
So probably the first thing coming to mind is that one of the men kissed the woman and the other wasn't too impressed about that. And so they slapped him. So
yeah, and that's a reasonable assumption based on what you have seen in the world and in life from your background. So that's a reasonable assumption, and that tells us a little bit about Tegan's background and experience, and which then brings her to make those decisions. And then Rachel Sigonio, what are your thoughts on what happened?
Hi, Sam. I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen that video as yet. So I can let you know once I have watched it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then Jackson, what do you think might have happened?
Well, I had the same thought as Tegan as well originally.
Yes.
So something similar to that, yeah.
Yeah. So based on one's worldview, that's what we think's happened. And this is the real challenge for detectives in police stations, to look at the evidence and to weigh it up. But it's not always as it seems, because the lady in this situation said, if you'd kissed me, you wouldn't have been slapped. I would have loved it. So maybe it wasn't the lady who got kissed. And then the soldier thinks in his mind, what a feeling. You kiss the palm of your hand, slap a colonel that you don't like across the face, and you feel great. And so, and I guess the reality is that we make reasonable assumptions based on what we've observed in the past, what our memories tell us, but at times our assumptions can be wrong. And that's what we're facing when we write an essay. That's what we're facing when we're encouraging students to think that some may make assumptions that could be incorrect. And that's why next week we'll read about Socrates, who said, question, question, question. And so he said, you just got to keep asking the questions, because eventually you might get to the root of the problem. there. So assumptions often forget our beliefs about what is reliable information and not. And I think all of your information was very reliable, but it didn't fit with this unique case. A father and his son go to watch a football game. They're driving home, come to a railway line. The car stops on the railway line. Train hits the car. The father's killed instantly. Son taken to hospital. Ambulance comes, and the doctor, a surgeon, says, looking at the boy, I can't operate. He is my son. So, Gabrielle, what do you think has happened here? Gabrielle or Anway, any thoughts on why can this person say, I can't operate, here's my son?
Could be, my first thought was could be a grandfather, but like, I don't know. That's the only thing I'm thinking of.
Sounds good. Gabriella Hart, any thoughts on what you think?
I was thinking that the doctor, since it was a car crash, the son's like disformed, and so it might have been the same height or look of a boy that is the doctor's son.
Yeah. And all of those are reasonable based on assumptions we're trying to work through. But
the mother is the doctor, right?
Exactly, Georgia, well done. So Georgia's worked it out. The assumption is that surgeons and doctors are often male. And so we've fallen into the trap of the society that we live in, which is male dominated for doctors and surgeons. So that's one of our prejudice or assumptions. Another one, man lives on the 10th floor of a building. Every day he takes a lift down to the ground floor, but when he returns and takes the lift up to the 7th floor, he only goes to the 7th floor and then walks up the remaining floors. Any thoughts on what may be the reason that he only goes to the 7th floor?
Perhaps there was no stairs to the 10th floor.
Yeah, that's reasonable. So yeah, the lift only goes down, doesn't come up, but no stairs. That's possible. Any other thoughts?
I've got one. Is it because technically including like lobby in the basement that even going to the 7th floor, it's still counted as the 10th floor based on like having like a lobby and a like parking basement and things like that?
Yeah, and that well could be it. And I've been in buildings where you can't work it out because they skip one here and there and all of that. So that's very reasonable. And one of the things that stands out to me here is that we're working it out through team effort, where people think differently. And one of the challenges with a team is to have a diversity of backgrounds and viewpoints. And one of the dangers in any organisation is people like to appoint similar people around them. And so I think you show that there, Rachel, with some good different thinking. The answer here is that the person is very short and can reach the one going down, can't reach it going up. Now, I'm not sure whether these are good thinking exercises or whether they are, they're going to suit some people in the class who think that way and not suit others who think differently, because it could be that there are different ways of thinking. So we're going to think about what thinking involves. We're going to think about some exercises that could be involved. What is critical thinking? Here are some thoughts on what critical thinking involves. Firstly, critical thinking can be observing. So it was said right at the beginning, I think Jackson and others said, you look at the world around, you find out about the world that's out there. And then another aspect that I think could be added there is reflecting, in that you could say that thinking also involves reflection, where you're looking within. And we could also put emotions and feelings there as other aspects of thinking. So I think that would give a more balanced view. Thinking can involve facts, and next week we're going to look at the way facts need to align with certain things, like are they knowable? So one question we have about facts is whether they're knowable or not. When it comes to thinking about the life after this life, and I wrote an essay on this once when I was doing my university studies on life after this life, and I was wanting to just write out the gospel and all of that, and they said, well, you've got to think it through. What evidence do we have about life after this life, and is it knowable? Anyone got any thoughts on what evidence we have, or do you want to take a more pessimistic view and say that it's not so easy to know? Or can we ask Patrick Swayze from Ghost, and he'll be able to tell us? But yeah, any thoughts on, is there evidence? What can we know? Martha?
I think as a Christian, if you're a Christian, the evidence lies within the Bible. Obviously, you know, we take that as the word of God. So our evidence points towards heaven and life after death. So I think that's where we find that. Yeah.
Yes. And certainly everyone who studies the life of Jesus finds that one of the most remarkable aspects of the life of Jesus is the resurrection. And so there's a lot of historical evidence, that is, people's lives have changed, world has changed. And so there's a lot of evidence for resurrection there. Doctors also tell us about afterlife experiences, and with a lot more ways of bringing people back. People talk of a white light and seeing themselves from above, etc. So we've then wrestled with the question of facts. Anyone, how would you verify both of these types of facts, resurrection, afterlife experiences? What are one or two ways that you can verify this sort of information? Any thoughts?
Maybe like first-hand sources, so like eyewitnesses.
Exactly. And so in both of those cases, you've got eyewitnesses. And so we've got 4 Gospels, we've got other people around as well. And then with afterlife experiences, you can then talk to the people. And then in most countries of the world, there are growing bodies of evidence of afterlife experiences there. And then there are other scholars who say, some reduce the body to just the body, but there is so much more going on that's you can't just do that. So we're going to look at inferences. How do we test the validity of these inferences? We're looking today a bit at assumptions, and we've done some exercises on that. And then there are opinions. And then in next week and weeks to come, we could look at what's a good argument, a strong argument, and number 7, what's a critical analysis. So let's take our 5 to 10 minute break there, and we'll come back in about 7 minutes time. So we'll stop the video and Moodle and Zoom there. We'll come back in about 5 to 7 minutes time and link back on. See you shortly.